Um, yeah, I too want to congratulate you for coming out on such a miserable night. And Eric and Liz, hi. I'm counting on you guys. If you can't hear me at some point, I'm going to keep an eye on you. And if for some reason if you can't hear me, that means others can't hear me. So there you go. Thank you. I also want to congratulate Will and Catherine on the show. It's really quite wonderful to see such an important and lovely show at the museum. And my next point is that as a result of a miscommunication, I think this was advertised, as I see it outside, as a talk about the show, about the works in the show. Now, I will be talking about them, but only tangentially. I had promised to do an overview of Matisse, which is what I'm going to do. It's a big subject, but I think it can be handled in an hour, partly because Matisse is a pretty consistent artist. There's not a lot of twists and turns, for example, as there are in the work of Picasso. So I think it is a subject that is manageable in an hour. And I also want to reassure, especially the husbands in the crowd who are here under duress, that I will not take longer than an hour. All right, to begin with, the title that I gave Glenna originally was The Political and the Platonic, and I will be touching on those things, but as I worked out the lecture over the last few weeks, I realized that the topic really is called The Raw and the Cooked. And as you'll see, it's really the idea, the central idea here. And I would like you to go away with a big idea or two. I hate to give the kind of lectures where later, when people say, "Did you enjoy the lecture? What did you think?" They say, "I enjoyed the lecture." And they say, "What did he say?" And you said, "Well, I don't know, but I enjoyed it." I'm hoping that the raw and the cooked, you will be able to say, he talked about the raw and the cooked. All right, let's get on with it. Matisse was a 20-year-old law student when he had a case of appendicitis, and his mother, while he recovered, his mother gave him some paints and some paper, and he enjoyed himself so thoroughly that he decided to give up law school and devote himself to being an artist, much to the chagrin of his father, rather classic, unhappy father. He began studying art in the early 1890s, and he tried several times to get into the École des Beaux-Arts, but was refused. Finally, after studying independently for several years, he was able to get into the École, and here is a painting done at the École. The École des Beaux-Arts was where artists trained to be, to be acceptable artists. This is a painting done in Moreau's studio. Moreau was the academic artist he trained under, and it's a very, very early work, a student work, in fact. It's a work that doesn't get discussed much in the literature. It's not thought to be a very important painting. It's not a great painting, as you can see. It's not particularly skilled. It's more of a sketch. It's not even signed, but it is an important painting because it's an important statement painting. And first of all, it's an important statement painting about where he was at the time. You'll notice the painting turns on a contrast between the model in the front, who has a little stick that she's holding, resting her arm on, so she can maintain the position for a long period. And behind her, a plaster cast of a Greek or Roman statue. The contrast between these two nicely articulate the fundamental premise of the Academy, of the education of the Academy. The fundamental premise here was that you studied life, you studied the model in order to perfect it, in order to make it as beautiful as the Greek and Roman ideal. The idea was that beauty is the aim of art, and that the Greeks and Romans discovered the beautiful, the universal beauty. Renaissance artists revived that beauty. And your job as a student was to learn it and then to apply it. You studied from the model in order not to copy the model, not in order to faithfully record what the model looked like, but literally in order to correct the model. Now, the models themselves that were chosen tended to be attractive men and women that as closely as possible appeared to be ideals themselves. So it is the premise here is the contrast between these two, the real and the ideal, the imperfect reality and the ideal. The real and the ideal are a binary. The idea of binaries was developed by a cultural anthropologist by the name of Claude Lévi-Strauss. His most important statement on this concept was a book called The Raw and the Cooked, which he published in 1964. Lévi-Strauss was a cultural anthropologist. He didn't go out into the field and study the natives. He studied myth. He sat in Paris in the library, in the Bibliothèque Nationale, and he studied the various myths from various cultures. And what he discovered was that all myths from all cultures, regardless of geography or time or chronology, all depend on binaries, depend on opposites. He called it the opposite between the privileged and the unprivileged. And what he concluded from this is that binaries are central to the human brain. This is the way humans think. It's a human trait to think in binaries. We think in terms of good and bad. We think in terms of here and there. We think in terms of spirit versus flesh. These oppositions. And largely, of course, it has to do with the fact that we tend to be a binary creature or a binary species, male and female, 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. So binaries, and one of the binaries that he discussed was the raw and the cooked, and it is a binary that that figures in what we're going to be talking about tonight. The other reason that this is an important early statement is that not only an articulation of where he was and a statement of how aware he was of exactly what the terms of reference here were, but of the fact that this is the place that he preferred. The studio was his place. This was not a man who went out and studied cafes like Manet. He didn't study the opera like Degas. He didn't do tourist landscapes like Monet. He didn't do his family. He didn't do his wife. He didn't do his children. He basically didn't go outside. He spent his time in the studio. So what we see here is, from the very first, is the subject to which he will be devoted, the place he will be devoted, and the activity to which he'll be devoted, which is to stay the study of the beautiful female model. He doesn't do the male model, he does the female model. Sometimes he paints himself painting the model. So the studio is his place. One of the earliest important statements of this is Carmelina, which he did after graduating in 1903. And it's a picture, again, of the studio. And it's a picture of the artist and the model. We are looking at this from Matisse's point of view. He is looking into the mirror, and he sees himself. He sees her directly, and he sees her in the reflection. This is a painting about who's in charge. This is a painting about who dominates whom. It's about what matters in the artistic process. The motif or the artist. And in this particular case, the competition is won by the motif. She dominates the work. Life dominates the artist, even though he tries very hard to compete with her, and he does so through color. He's got the brightest color in the work is his shirt, the red of his shirt and the blue of the vase in front of him. But at this point, she wins. What's unusual about this painting, however, is the degree to which, even at this date, most of the works that he was producing, he dominates the subject. Some of his earliest works were still lifes. At first, they were very naturalistic, as the still life on the left, still life on your left, still life with grapes. By the end of the 90s, however, he was bringing greater color to them, which is to say he was adding something to that. Now, both of these studios, I should say, are studio still lifes. Both of them are set up in the studio, and they're set up in the studio to provide an attractive arrangement of shapes and forms and colors. And to the already beautiful subject, he has added something more. He has added color. He has added decoration. So already what he's doing here is cooking. He is already taking something that is partially cooked, and he's cooking it further. The same thing with this landscape. Now again, I said a moment ago that he was not a landscape painter. Early in his career, he tried landscape on a couple of occasions, and here is an early one. This was a subject that he would very quickly tire of, and it didn't interest him. But here is an early example of that, and as you can see, what he's done here, he has taken a naturalistic scene, a view out of an apartment window of Notre Dame, and he has added something to it. He's cooked it. He's made it more beautiful by making the color more beautiful. Now, the choice of color here is purely decorative. That is to say, to make it more attractive to the eye. The color blue is chosen not because it's spiritual. That's Kandinsky would, as in Kandinsky. This is purely a decorative approach to color. About this time, he read an important book. It was a treatise by a man by the name of Paul Signac, and the title is From Eugene Delacroix to Neo-Impressionism. And it is a book about the evolution of painting and the evolution of color. It is a book that is an avant-garde treatise, and most of you I think, are familiar with the term avant-garde. For most people, they understand the term simply as something new and different. But the term refers to progress in art, refers to a notion that there is a development in art, that art is going somewhere, that one artist's work is inspiring another development in the work of another artist, who then picks that up and develops it further. It's a very evolutionary concept. And what Paul Signac was trying to argue was that there was an evolution in modern art, and the evolution went from Eugene Delacroix, and it went in his use of color. There are wonderful little touches of color added in Delacroix's work, color that has nothing to do with representation, color that has to do with simply something added. It then goes through Impressionism and then goes through Neo-Impressionism, which is to say the work of Seurat. Seurat is now using, and there is the Georges Seurat's famous Grand Jatte, and Seurat is using color more scientifically, breaking color up into little dots, okay, to be joined and merged in the eye. Paul Signac, who considered himself a follower of Seurat, took that development one step further in works like this, the Antibes Harbor, in which he's taking the small dots and turning the small dots into little blocks of color. So the color has now become free from representation. It is free to serve. It doesn't represent the subject. It serves the subject. It helps articulate the subject. It is again, an avant-garde. The term avant-garde, avant means before, garde is the elite that goes before. And this was a notion of the artist that develops in the later 19th century. An idea that the job of the artist is to pick up the latest developments and move these developments further, to advance them. For a long time, really up until the 1970s, the highest compliment a critic could make about an artist was that he or she was advanced. although there weren't so many she's. The painting we see here on the right by Matisse was produced under the guidance of Signac. Matisse got to know Signac as a result of reading his book, and the two of them became friends. And in the summer of 1904, Signac invited Matisse to come to Saint-Tropez to spend the summer with him, where he introduced him to his approach, to his advanced approach to color, to his more advanced approach, to his avant-garde approach to color. Now, the subject of the work is taken from a poem by Baudelaire. The poem by Baudelaire is Invitation to a Voyage. It's a poem that he devoted to his mistress, and it's an invitation to her to join him on a boat trip to a world where everything is calm, order, beauty, luxury, calmness, and voluptuousness. So the boat here in the work is the boat that we've now taken to this wonderful world. And it's a paradise. It's a hedonistic paradise. It's a paradise that is literally Arcadia, a very popular subject in French painting of the 19th century, an idyllic image of early Greece when nymphs and satyrs ran around the countryside, enjoying themselves physically, sexually. It's a hedonistic image. Up until this point, he had been using color decoratively, as I said, to improve the appearance of the work. Here, he's using color, again, under Signac's influence, he's using color expressively. And this is a term that I know many of you know, and the definition of expressive, the arrangement of formal elements of art, color, line, texture, etc., to convey something about the subject. And here, the bright colors, the bright, warm reds and yellows are meant to articulate both the happiness, the emotional happiness of this place, but primarily its sensuality. So color is being used expressively. Soon after finishing this painting, he met these two guys. And these two guys were doing something even more advanced. Duran and Flamenc, or two artists who had fallen under the spell of Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh died not too long ago. In 1901, there was a big retrospective of his work, and Flamenc and Duran were much taken with his work, and what they saw in his work was something beyond expressive. What they saw in his work was a further development of an approach to color called Expressionism. And Expressionism is related to expressive, the difference being this, that here the alteration of the formal elements of art are to convey the feelings of the artist. So what they record is the feelings of the artist in front of the scene. So the raw colors and the raw shapes express the raw emotions of the artist in front of this scene. The year after spending the summer in Saint-Tropez, Matisse spent the summer in Collioure with Duran, where he learned this new and more advanced approach to color, not in the expressive use, but the expressionistic use. And here, the two of them are painting side by side. They are painting the same theme from a slightly different angle, as you can see, but using colors freely, emotionally, not to articulate something about the place, although it does, but mostly to express their sense of joy in the face of nature. As Matisse said, we were like children in the face of nature and expressed ourselves freely. Paintings, not these, but paintings like these, were shown in an exhibition in the fall of that year, and the critics howled. In fact, one of the critics referred to their works to refer to them as fauves. He called them wild beasts. This was not meant as a compliment. This was meant as a reference to the fact that they were clearly untutored savages. And the name stuck, and we now refer to this kind of work as Fauvism. Matisse very quickly tired of Fauvism. I know one tends to continue to think about Matisse as a Fauve, and that is not accurate. He was a Fauve for about 20 minutes. And what he didn't like about Fauvism can be seen in this painting and in remarks he made, very important theoretical remarks he made in 1908. In 1908, he wrote an essay called Notes of a Painter. And what he said in that was this: often when I sit down to work, I note my immediate color sensations, again, recording my feelings, the passing sensations of a moment. He then goes on to say that now I don't like these paintings because they remind him of moments of nervous intensity. He said, nowadays I try to put serenity into my pictures, which will be for every mental worker a mental soother, something like a good armchair. And the armchair remark has become his most famous remark, an indication of what the purpose of his works is, not to record his feelings, but to make the viewer feel better, to provide something restful, something soothing, something relaxing after a hard day. Now, for Monet, this was, for Matisse, this was particularly important because, as one of his biographers described him, he tended to be a man who was madly anxious. He tended to be a very anxious man. And so these paintings, like the one on the left here, only made him feel worse. And so the concern here is not only to make the viewer, well, to make the viewer feel better. The first viewer, and the most important viewer, of course, being Matisse himself. The shift away from Fauvism can be seen in this painting, probably his most famous work, The Joy of Life. This is a painting that returns us to the expressive approach. It is based on a sketch, and the sketch itself is rather Fauvist. The painting itself, however, is carefully done over time and carefully done in order to provide the viewer with images of warmth, relaxation. Like the painting Lux Convent Volupte, we are again back in Arcadia. We're back in Arcadia, a world of nymphs, a world of satyrs, nymphs. Again, a world of hedonism, relaxation, pleasure, happiness, all conveyed, again, expressively through the choice of rich, warm colors and through the approach to line, these fluid, graceful lines that are, again, relaxing. This is, again, art as an armchair, soothing, relaxing. In his essay on Notes of a Painter, he had other things to say, however. Two of the most important, which are these. One of them is, I cannot copy nature in a servile way. I must interpret nature and submit it to the spirit of the picture, to create a harmony not unlike that of a musical composition. So what he's saying here is, quite frankly, I cannot copy nature, although nature is my subject. What I'm doing here is imposing on nature to create something aesthetically appealing, something, the spirit of the picture. And when he's talking about the spirit of the picture, he's talking about the aims of the picture, the aesthetic aims of the picture of the artist. He also says this: there are two ways of expressing things. One is to show them crudely. The other is to evoke them artistically. And abandoning the literal representation, it is possible to reach towards a higher ideal of beauty, nature's truer, more essential character. So what he's talking about here, again, is something related to the academic ideal. Not to show it crudely, okay, not to, but to show it artistically, to evoke them artistically, by use of the aesthetic sensibility of the artist, to try to achieve and reach toward the higher ideal of beauty, the higher ideal of nature's more essential character. And it is this idea that dominates the rest of his life. the ideal that he is working from nature, but not in order to copy it. He's working from nature in order to express something higher, to bring the viewer onto a higher plane, to reach the higher ideal. Shortly after painting the Joie de Vivre, he gives up Arcadia and moves to the theme of art. He takes he does a series of paintings based on the dance that you see in the background of the Joie de Vivre, and he turns that into a series of paintings focusing on the dance, focusing on art, not focusing on Arcadia, not taking us to Arcadia, but art about art, art about the arts. He also includes it in many of his paintings at the time. On the right, Nasturtiums with Dance. This is one of many paintings, again done in his studio, which include paintings, his own paintings. And this is one of the characteristic elements of his work, is to make paintings that include his own paintings, making it clear that the subject of his art is art. The other element in this work is nasturtiums, a vase of a plant vase. The most complete statement of this series, I believe, is this work here. This is entitled Still Life with Dance, and again, here we are in the studio, in the artist's own studio with the painting in the back. The two other elements that we find characteristically in these works at this time are decorative patterns, decorative fabric, and bouquets of vases of flowers. Now, both of these things have something in common. He likes fabric, but he only likes fabric that is based on organic shapes, on natural shapes. He doesn't do geometric shapes. He does organic shapes. And the flowers, the same thing. The key, again, is the flowers, and the vase of flowers is a wonderful metaphor for what he thinks he's doing, what he is doing, okay? A flower arrangement, what you do to make a flower arrangement is you go out into the garden and you gather flowers, okay? You gather the flowers and you bring them in. So you gather something that is already beautiful. And then you arrange them in such a way as to make them more beautiful. So you've increased the beauty. Through the aesthetic sensibility of the artist, through the aesthetic sensibility of the arranger, you have taken something beautiful and raised it onto a higher plane. You've produced something that is more beautiful. Now, from this point, the ideal that he pursues is the question: what kind of ideal is he pursuing? Now, as he's working on these paintings, something else is going on in another set of studios nearby, and that is the development of Cubism. Cubism is being developed by George Braque and Pablo Picasso. And here, the revolution here, the avant-garde revolution, the Cubist avant-garde revolution, is the revolution of form. The revolution that he had been taking part in is the revolution of color. More and more liberties being taken with color, a more and more advanced approach to color. Here now, we have an entirely different ideal. And from roughly 1911 until the end of the war, Cubism dominated. It became the dominant avant-garde style. If you wanted to be taken seriously as an avant-garde artist, and these young men all did, because being taken seriously as a member of the avant-garde was how you got the critical attention, was how you got the collector's attention, was how you became famous, how you became wealthy. And so they all wanted to join. So what happened is that people suddenly left the color bandwagon and jumped onto the Cubist bandwagon. Here I'm showing you not only the works of Braque and Picasso, but an example of the works of Fernand Léger and his response to Cubism. What happens to Matisse is that Matisse has to respond to it in order to be taken seriously. And so his ideal gets inflected. What he had been producing as the beautiful is now adjusted by this new ideal of formal liberties, of as you can see in these two works. And this, from this period, the period from 1911 into 1918, I'm referring to it as the ideal that he's pursuing is the avant-garde ideal, is the Cubist ideal. It is still a decorative ideal. He's still producing paintings that mean to be beautiful, but now he's having to adjust to these new demands of Cubism to produce works that are formally more inventive, okay, that are flatter, and that take greater liberties with shape, and sometimes even approach pure formalism. That is to say, an arrangement of shapes and colors. The work on the right, for example, The Yellow Curtain, is based on a naturalistic subject, but you wouldn't know it. It's almost non-representational. You can also see it here in this work, Piano Lesson. What I'm showing you here is the sketch for Piano Lesson. Now, all of these paintings were based on a series of sketches, and we don't have all of the sketches. I suspect that this sketch on the left is a fairly advanced one, and what you see is that the sketch itself corresponds to the kind of work that he had been producing. That is to say, very ornate, very ornamental, very organic, okay? Simplification of organic shapes, still somewhat naturalistic, really an articulation of his taste. Here on the right is what he's producing, what he's done with it, and what he's done with it is to produce something more radical from a formal standpoint. The shapes, that green shape, which is just a shape, the black wedge that comes across the young man's eye, for example. All of these are purely improvisations of color. And so what he's doing, he's demonstrating that he is still with it. He is still avant-garde. This period ends with the ending of the war and what follows. What followed the war was, on the part of many avant-garde artists, a retreat. You see it in the works, certainly of the works of Picasso. Picasso, the man who had developed and invented Cubism, is now suddenly gone back to painting very, very conservative images based on classical statues. Gino Severini, a member of the Futurist group, there's a future, that his work on the top there is a futurist work, clearly, obviously in response to Cubism's breaking up of shapes and forms, suddenly now back to not only a conservative image representationally, but a conservative image in terms of its subject matter, the Madonna and Child. Matisse welcomed this retreat and returned himself to the kind of decorative paintings, the kind of based on decorative patterns that he had preferred. But his work too is a retreat. And it's a retreat to a new ideal, and I call that the patriarchal ideal. The dominant subject that he produces in the period literally from 1918 until 1942, until late in his life, was the Odalisque. The Odalisque, of course, is a concubine, a slave, a concubine in the harem of a Turkish sultan, and it was a very, very popular theme in the 19th century. Delacroix was one of the first to do it. It was particularly popular for sexual reasons, in terms of its sexual fantasy. It appealed very strongly to the male taste for fantasy, that the idea that this beautiful woman is owned by you, is a piece of property. Okay? And in doing this particular theme, Matisse was demonstrating his own notions of the ideal female. And what he's responding to here in these works is the concept of what is called the new woman, During the war, one result of the war was that many of the jobs done by men, when men went off to war, the jobs were taken over by women. And after the war, not all of these women were happy to go back to the kitchen. Many of these women enjoyed the liberty and the freedom of having their own control of their own lives, of having their own money. And the result of it was a concept called the new woman, the new liberated woman. Matisse's work are a response to that. Matisse's works are a reaction to that. They're an articulation of the idea that women don't belong in the workplace. They don't belong outdoors. The statement being made here is that women are happiest when they're cloistered, happiest when they don't have to work, happiest when they can just lie around. And you see this particularly on the face of this woman. You'll notice her expression. She's just happy as she can be, simply to be a slave. So it's a very, very conservative and very reactionary image of the female, of the role of the female. Now, it is a decorative ideal. The woman is still an ideal, it's still beautiful, but it is, again, it has a political implication, and this is one of the politics. There isn't a lot of politics in his work, but this is the major politics, the sexual politics, implicit in this notion. And of course, it is an old-fashioned notion, articulated also in the identification of woman with flowers and with fruit. Because what it says is that women are like flowers and fruits. They are there for our pleasure. They are there for our enjoyment. They are not there for themselves. They are there for us, for the male viewer. Again, a very conservative, patriarchal notion of the female. And it is a subject, as I said, that goes right through to the end of the, right through until the early 40s. Here is one, Odalisque in a brown chair. Now, not all of these women are Odalisques. Woman in purple coat, for example, is not an Odalisque, but she might as well be. It's the same conception, whether she's an Odalisque or simply a pampered woman at home, spending her time relaxing, indulging herself, again, making herself beautiful. The notion is the notion of the female in these works is the same. Now, what he's doing with all of these, he's always working from sketches. As I showed you a moment ago in my introductory remarks, he spends his time with his models, and these models, he always chooses beautiful models, and he will then, whether they're nude or dressed, beautifully dressed or beautifully naked, they tend to be fairly naturalistic, but then what he does with them is he cooks them. He makes them more beautiful, taking the beautiful and raising it to a higher level of beauty. But that beauty is, again, as I said, a very conservative one. This period of his career and his life comes to an end in 1941. In 1941, he he's diagnosed with cancer. And he has an abdominal cancer, and he is operated on, and he is expected not to live. He does live, and in fact, he lives for another 13 years, but he lives as an invalid. He lives bedridden or in his wheelchair. And what this meant was that it was hard to paint. It took too much effort to paint. What he turned to was the cutouts. Now, the cutouts was something he had experimented with as a compositional device in a couple of very large decorative projects that he had done as a way of helping him think about the composition. And so he returned to this subject because he could do it very easily. He could simply, with a pair of scissors and colored paper, spend his time happily, as you can see, happily cutting out shapes, which he would then with the help of his assistants, place on surfaces, arranging these various elements on surfaces. And the result is an extraordinary body of work. In those 13 years, he did over 200 works, including the series of jazz. These aren't the series that we have on view here. It was made from cutouts. It's not cutouts, but it belongs to the cutout phase of his life because they were produced by putting together the various cutouts. Here is a good example of it, the horse. This was published in 1947. As the wall label tells us, the choice of the term, of the title jazz, was political. He began working on these works during the occupation by the Nazis, and the Nazis hated jazz. The Nazis thought it was a degenerate form, and so by calling it jazz, he was making a political statement. Even though the work is really more about the subject, at least, is more about the circus, like here. The jazz elements, of course, is music, and he is thinking about this, again, as he said in the Notes of a Painter, what I'm doing is like music. I'm submitting the elements to the spirit of the picture like a musical composition. He's composing with the different elements. These are the notes that he's composing with. The critical aspect of this period of his career is what the notes are. And one of the things you'll notice here and throughout these notes is that most of these notes are organic. They're organic shapes. Some of them are flower shapes, but most of them are various shapes of vegetation, leaves, and as you can see here, all of these kind of leaf shapes. This becomes the fundamental vocabulary, is organic shapes, natural shapes. You see it here too. And some of the cutouts, again, are very small, but you can see the vocabulary he's using. It's a very consistent vocabulary of organic forms, organic shapes, sometimes small, sometimes very, very big. One of my own favorites is this. This is the Parakeet and the Mermaid. A great big wall piece, cutouts. All of these, again, leaf shapes, these organic shapes. And there's a little parakeet. I guess that's the little dot over there. There's the parakeet. It doesn't look much like a parakeet, but that is the parakeet. And then there's the mermaid over here. And what he said about the work is that I have made a little garden all around me where I can walk. Well, in a way, it's not a garden at all. It's a flower arrangement. It takes us back. This is a work that takes us back to Still Life or Dance. It's an arrangement of floral elements. It's an arrangement of organic elements. Something taking nature, working from nature again. You don't turn your back on nature, but what you do with nature is you work toward, in this case, a higher ideal. And I think here, finally, he's back to the nature's ideal. Did I say that here? Yeah. He's back to nature's truer, more essential character. The natural ideal, nature. The Platonic ideal of nature. The other subject is the subject of the nude. And the most famous of these is a series of blue nudes that he did in 1952. And these blue nudes relate to a subject that he didn't do very much of in painting. It's a subject that he did in drawing, in graphics, in his prints, in his lithographs. The subject so often treated in his illustrations for Mallarmé, for example. And it is the essential nude. It's the Platonic nude. It's the general, the ideal of the nude. The Platonic ideal, of course, being the idea that the various real things are all pale and dim reflections of some higher ideal that all chairs, for example, are simply dim reflections of the ideal of the chair, that all nudes, that all females or all males are pale reflections of the ideal. And what he's giving us for years in his graphics is that ideal, that essence of the female nude, curves. What he's done in the blue nudes, however, is to go beyond that. And he goes beyond that through the use of color. Because you'll notice the color of these, they're blue. Why blue? It's not the color of flesh. What is blue the color of? Blue is the color of the sky. Blue is the color of water. Blue is the color of nature. So here we have the ultimate combination of the natural, of nature, the female. And you'll notice that's in terms of color. What's different about these colors is that in his late work, the colors are much more intense than the colors were before. The colors were always attractive colors, but not bright, not bold, not powerful colors. Not what I would even call Platonic colors. I think what he's giving us here in the late works is the culmination of that idea that he first stated in Notes of a Painter, that I'm going to get to nature's higher ideal, nature's higher essence, both in terms of the shapes and in terms of the colors. Works that take us onto a higher plane. Thank you very much. And I will take some questions if you have them.